spent about 25 years spending time at bedside at end of life. And through that experience and through some really isolating experiences in the workplace, I came to developing grief advocacy just before the pandemic hit, which seems kind of serendipitous, actually. But so essentially we go into healthcare, or we went into healthcare organizations, and we took care of employees, healthcare employees who were grieving and going through trauma while in the pandemic. So we spent a lot of time in long-term care, we spent a lot of time in retirement homes. And now we're moving back into the workplace in a little bit of a different way, and hoping to see organizations actually change their bereavement processes. Wouldn't that be nice? And through hopes and dreams, change some policies. So that's what we do. Thanks.
And Yvonne?
Hello, Yvonne Heath. I am a nurse turned author, speaker, and change maker. 27 years of nursing. Realized, I don't know if you all know, we're a society that's very ill prepared for grief, transitions, end of life, death, dying, all of it. And all the people that said they weren't grieving, how adorable, or hadn't grieved, we're going to chat about you. Yes, I became very anxious in my career. I did 15 years. I was 15, 17 years in chemotherapy, realized that we weren't having real conversations and people were grieving all kinds of things, right? Have you ever had like enough and then something else happens? You're like, are you kidding me? So in 2015, took a leap of faith, left my nursing career. My lovely husband, Jordy, here is a paramedic, gave him a little bit of a panic with 3 kids and a mortgage and said, I'm going to leave my nursing career and write a book. It's called Love Your Life to Death, and I'm going to speak, and I know I don't do any of that stuff, but it's been an extraordinary journey since of sharing stories and creating social change, one conversation at a time. So that's why we're here, and we're going to have some fun.
Yes.
Grief
and
fun.
You do have some swag at the back, don't you? If people are interested.
We always have swag.
That. So I've only prepared 2 questions, so I'm hoping that you folk have some questions as we go through the conversation. But we'll begin with the first of those, which is, how is it that grief is so isolating? How does it isolate people?
You go.
Well, it's very interesting as a healthcare professional, and well, 2 of my passions are supporting the supporters, caregivers, whether it's personally or professionally, and nursing students. Hello, ladies. I'm so excited you're here. We don't even what is grief? Right? Like, when do we talk about grief? When do we prepare for grief? So I kind of stood back and realized as a nurse, people thought I should be really super great with grief, death, and dying. I said, aren't you a nurse? Didn't you learn about that in nursing school? Yes, 30 years ago. I may have skipped that class. I don't remember. What I realized is that grief is our mental, physical, and emotional reaction to loss, transitions, and change, right? Anything that makes your heart ache. Divorce, diagnosis, job loss, mental health issues, climate change, racism, bullying, not being accepted in your community. Now who knows that they've experienced grief or knows somebody? It's 100% of us. It could be as simple as not getting picked by a team, right? And so how it's isolating is, first of all, we don't even recognize it. And we've also medicalized, sanitized, professionalized, and complicated. We think, oh, we better leave that to the professionals, right? We think that, and our professionals are very important. However, when you were divorced, and someone was talking about divorced men, even greater, because you're going to pretend you're fine when you're not, you're no longer part of that social circle. Or when your spouse dies, or you didn't make that team, or when you moved, there's tremendous grief in that, and no one recognizes it. And what do we celebrate? Pretending we're fine when we're not. Anybody ever, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm fine, thanks. If you need anything, let me know. And that person's like running because they don't really mean it. And so it's isolating on so many levels. And then we compare our grief. Well, I'm just having a little bit of a struggle and they're having a big struggle, so I won't say anything. And I will tell you is that creates excessive suffering for everyone.
So good. So good. I have a slower answer. Because I really think that there's 2 reasons why grief is so isolating. And it applies to general grief. There are griefs that are much more complex, yes, and I understand, and I want to hold those. But when we talk about grief that we all experience, there's really two things I think that are at the bottom of that isolation reason, and that is the loss of self and the loss of connection. And if we can, in some way, make sure that when that grief is not isolating, we would have to do that through connection so that we can reconnect to ourselves, so that we can reconnect to community, and so that we can reconnect to who we are now that we're carrying this. So those are really, in my opinion, the two major parts of why grief is so isolating. And then we can get into all the social reasons why we shame and feel guilty around grief. But if I had to narrow it all down, it would be those two. Yeah.
Okay. Any questions? Anyone want to ask any questions? Anyone? Oh, lady back there. Yes. Yes. Come meet me halfway. Yes.
When I think about grief and sort of the isolation that can come with it, a recent experience for me is my younger brother and his sister-in-law. They lost her father very, very unexpectedly. And something that they talk about, something that I experienced and something that they talk about as well is that their friends weren't sure how to be there for them, especially after that very first initial phase. So I wonder if you have any suggestions on how to be there for people in your lives when they've lost someone, you know. Thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Perfect. You'll get your tip later. It's so interesting, right? Because just a little backstory. I started this journey because I worked in chemotherapy, had 2 small children, and our older son had a lot of big losses in his life and went down a road of drugs and addiction. You want to talk about isolating? And that is what people were afraid to talk to me, and I was a healthcare professional. I worked in healthcare, and they were afraid to talk to me. And here's the thing, right? When you don't know what to do and you don't know what to say, you avoid. Afraid to do or say the wrong thing. We're terrified that we're not qualified. Everybody yell out the answer, please. How do we get good at anything? Oh my God, everybody knows. We practice. What do we do when it comes to responding to someone who has had a tragedy in their life, a child who's addicted, a divorcee, a suicide? What do? Where do we talk about that? Where do we practice what to do or say? Anybody? Because you don't yell the answer. I said, how do we? Yes, you do have the bracelet.
That's amazing.
But where do we practice this? Where do we say, you know what? Like, where do we have the class before, during, and always? Where do we talk about this proactively? What do you do? What do you say when someone is grieving? We're reactive as a society, right? We're not proactive. We don't have those conversations before. And that's why I said when I started this new journey and left my nursing career, I said, okay, well, I want to talk to all the proactive people where we're talking about this before grief arrives. Where are they all? Well, it's been 7 years. I still haven't found them. So if you know anybody, let me know. Why would we know what to do or say? And we're so hard on ourselves. We want to fix it. We also have the itises, fixitis, martyritis, like, you know, I don't know what to do or say, so I better just step away. So we need to be kinder to ourselves and say, yeah, you're right. We don't know what to do or say, and there is an easy answer. When you don't know what to do, you don't know what to say, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, and you can't fix it, the magic answer is just show up. Just show up. I don't know what to say, but I'm here. This is devastating. This is awful. I'm so sad. I wish I could fix this. Let's just allow our humanness.
Word. So I would suggest a few things. I think Yvonne said it beautifully. I don't know what to say, but I'm here. I would suggest that in any situation where you're faced with a griever, that is a good backup sentence in any situation, because there are not words. There's no words that they're going to magically do something that are going to fix the moment, but showing up does. The other part in that show up that I would add on to that is don't do the call me if you need me. That's boo. That's a big boo-boo. And the reason I say it is because we're talking about burden, right? And as I'm going to be your supporter, but I'm going to put the burden of figuring out that support on the griever, and I'm going to put the burden of having to make that really big call and ask on the griever, and I'm just going to sit back and say, well, I told them they could call me if they needed anything, right? So show up, and in my estimations, show up and ask yes/no questions is a really easy way to do that. So in the wintertime, drive by their house and wipe off their car. Walk up to their porch, send them a text and say, I'm going to the park, I'm gonna pick up your dog. It's the actions and how we show up, as long as we show up with the yes/no type responses or actions. And I would also recommend hearing no 1,000,000 times, because there is nothing more lonely than feeling like you're a burden. But when you can sit and ask hear it asked to you 1,000,000 times, eventually it will be yes, and it will be the balm to a really bad day. So please hear no 1,000 times, please. So that's what I got.
I love it, love it, love it.
got
You're so smart.
There
Can
is
I just say one little story very quickly?
very quickly, yeah.
Very quickly.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Here's because you can take this away, and I'm going to teach you how to just show up in one short story. Someone said that she didn't want, her dad died. She had to go clean out his house. She didn't want a shovel. She got there. Someone had shoveled the walkway and the front entrance and said, I shoveled the walkway in memory of your dad. Yeah. I did this in memory of.
Yeah.
Beautiful way to just show up.
We have a gentleman who has a question, but before we ask him, I just want to follow up on what you've both said there. Because I've got a few people in my life who've had quite recent losses, I say recent, in the last few years. And what happens is they are absolutely incredibly well connected with all their community for a very short period of time. Mm-hmm. And then everyone disappears and they're gone, whereas the grief and the loss remains with that person. So what's going on there, and can we fix that, or yeah?
Yeah, I mean, grief never goes away. So you will grieve for the rest of your life. And in my humble opinion, lucky you. It means you had something worth grieving, and you have this beautiful companion that you can build allyship with throughout your life. And not many people think of grief that way specifically, but the idea that you've got this check of your humanness that is with you all the time will constantly remember what it feels like to love, and it will dare you to love again. So this is why grief is so important to our lives. And in that instance, I would suggest that most people, and especially those that lose their spouse, year 2 is actually the hardest part, because that's when everyone kind of F's off a little bit, right? That's a bad word. I know, I'm sorry. But it's true, everyone kind of takes off year 2. They don't show up for birthdays, they don't show up for anniversaries, those types of things. So I just want to maybe put year 2 in your horizon for people who are grieving, and reach out on some of those important days. And I think that extends the community piece when we need it the most.
Love that. Thank you, Sarah. And here's the thing about grieving, and it's a whole we could talk about this stuff all day. And this is this is the beginning of a conversation. And, you know, we always have to learn, unlearn, and evolve. A friend of mine, Maria Klivkov, talked about how if we convert our grief to mourning, right? Because most of the time we grieve, and society wants us to grieve quietly and then get over it and then be done with it. And mourning is that external expression, and we have to get it out. And people used to say to me, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to say. That's why I started my TED Talk that way. Yeah, I did a TED Talk, P.S. And people were like, well, what if I make them cry? And they were terrified. They're terrified to make them cry. And I said, that is wonderful that you created a safe enough space to make someone cry. And I'm mandated to make someone cry at least once a day, so if someone could go ahead and bawl. But that is something, to create that safe space. And I know you've spoken to kids, I've spoken to kids, and I say, when you're grieving and you're frustrated and you're angry, hug it out, shout it out, talk it out, yell it out, hug it out, cry it out, however you can get those feelings out. And then that grief isn't going to have its grips in you your whole life. You will have times, it's like a roller coaster. There's ebbs and flows, and maybe it's 10 years down the road and you're like, oh, I feel like this just happened yesterday. And if you can acknowledge and allow your feelings and mourn in a safe space and say, yep, I'm having a hard day today. And that whole thing about the griever not knowing what to do, we have to get good at giving and receiving, get good at asking. People say, and stop pretending we're fine when we're not. People know if I'm having a hard time and they say, how are you? They better get ready for the truth. And if they say, if there's anything I can do, I say, absolutely. There's a long list here. And just initial beside what you want to do. Thank you very much. Walk the dog, cut the grass, pick
Cookies.
up kids, cookies, bring food, anything. We don't need a PhD to love and support people.
And Yvonne, we were speaking. This is Tony. Hi, Tony Estevez, who is dealing with traumatic grief in our family, and I just want to comment on some of what we were speaking about at lunch, and also Sarah on your comment about people not knowing what to say. One of the things that we found deeply supportive in our family, when someone who we knew or someone who we didn't know showed up to bring us a meal at the time of the loss, or just showed up, right, in some way, is they would very often start by saying, there are no words. When we're talking about a traumatic loss, right, there really are no words. And that, to me, I found to be a very safe starting point for the person who didn't know what words to offer support to the grieving family. Was just, there are no words, and we would agree, there are no words when you talk about someone's life being taken violently. And that just, I think, is something that, now that we're a year and a half past the tragedy and getting into the legal process behind that, now we have the capacity as the family who's lost a loved one to kind of help educate those people who still want to support, but they're like, I didn't call you because I didn't know what to say. And we can say, just call us. And absolutely don't be like, call me when you need me. It's like, please, what my wife Renee has really received the most support from has been people who she didn't expect, just sending a little message or phoning her like many months after the tragedy. And so that's just something I wanted to offer from someone who's, I mean, I do believe every one of us in this room is grieving in some way. But with what our experience is, I just wanted to offer my 2 cents on that. And thank you, Yvonne, for our conversation at lunch.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And if I could add, you know, if we didn't just show up in the past, it's never too late to just show up and say, you know what? I was a schmuck last year. You needed me. I didn't know what to do or say, and it wasn't about me. And I am so sorry that I didn't, and I am here now. It's never too late to just show up.
Do you want to yell it back? Oh, is there? Yeah.
Hi. I feel like our society is going through a collective grief, our world, with COVID. And I am observing just such a huge rush to get back to normal without actually us processing what we all experienced. And it's the only thing in my lifetime that's happened, and probably I would assert everyone in this room, where we had a global experience that changed our lives. And so I'm interested to know if anybody is kind of tackling this in a way that will come to society to allow us to grieve COVID.
It doesn't matter. Every single person on the face of the planet should be. A really good example of collective grieving is George Floyd. We saw, it was probably one of, and you have to be really good at holding on to grief and gratitude at the same time to be able to see this. But you're watching communities of people connect over grief in a way that was probably one of the most beautiful ways that we've ever seen in a very long time. I think the isolation around the pandemic led to an internal view, and I can get pretty philosophical on this, so you have to stop me. But I think it's this rise of the individual that is causing us, like, so for example, self-care. The idea that self-care is the mode that we are pushing right now is a problem, because we're asking the people that have the problem to be able to fix the problem. And that's not okay. If we actually embraced community care, and I was able to learn from you and you and you, and I was able to hold on to the stories that you were able to tell, that is balm to my grief. So my advice is that it's too big for one heart to hold. And that if you can hold on by just building a little bit of a longer table and do it in a very honoring and present way, that will ripple out to the next person and to the next person and to the next person. Because they're learning from you the importance of community. And that, in my estimation, is the only way through it.
Love that, my friend. Absolutely, and just to echo that, if we can approach all of this with heart, humor, and humanness, if we can learn to, so with the bracelets, the hashtag I just showed up movement, and it says show up for yourself first, and that isn't in a individual way, but in a way where you say, I'm really struggling today, and you know, when there is collective grief, and then you have your community grief, and then you have this crap in your life that's going on. You would not believe what we've been through in September, eh, dear? Even in good transitions, there's grief. Our children went off to university. We didn't have time to grieve that because there were too many other big things. However, I acknowledged and allowed my grief, and I reached out when I needed to. And I think that we need to really check in with ourselves and our boundaries. What's okay for me right now and what's not? And sometimes when there is collective grief and it's so huge that I just need a minute right now as my life is falling apart. And then I'm going to come back to this. And I think that it becomes so huge with the pandemic, the racism, all of the horrible things, the residential schools, all the learning about this. I mean, it could collapse all of us. And if we can say, I'm going to acknowledge and allow my grief, I'm going to just show up and light my candle. And that is what I can do. Be proactive, practice just showing up and hearing stories without internalizing it, right? And just be a part of the good and not stay in the why. That's another why. If we get mired in the why, Tony and I were talking about this, why did this happen? How could this happen? Why? What answer would be good enough? I have no idea. We need to now what? How can we connect and carry on? Teach by example.
Whoop. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for all this. It's really enabling and empowering and helpful. For those of us who might still be afraid to just show up because of not knowing exactly what to say or afraid of saying something wrong, I'm just wondering, I've heard and read and tried to, build my capacity or expertise to, to show up properly. And I remember hearing of one thing not to say, and I'm just wondering your impressions and your advice on this. And what that was don't say something like, yeah, but at least it's not. So your impressions on that? I think it's bad, but I'd like to hear from you.
You gotta get it out. You gotta get it out.
So I share a presentation. Heather's heard it a couple times, and I have 7 takeaways. And I talk about the things. Here's the thing. Number 1, and thank you for admitting that you are all scared to just show up, and this man is brave enough to. This man was brave enough to admit it. And here's the thing. Again, why would you know? We don't practice. How do you get good at anything, right? I will let you off the hook. You are going to get it wrong. Bam. You are going to offend someone. I've done it. And you know what I do? I allow my heart, humor, and humanness, and I say, you know what? I just at least it you, because at least is never helpful. It really isn't. At least you can try again. At least you can get married. At least you're young. At least blah, blah, blah. I have, and I called and I said, I cannot believe I at leasted you. Like, tell me what this is like for you. I am so sorry. I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. I've said it. You're going to get it wrong. How do we get better? We practice, we make a mistake, we learn, unlearn, evolve. Watch my TED Talk, it'll help you. No, seriously, it will. It's free, I mean, it's 14 minutes. Hug, text, email, call, sit silently and listen. If they didn't just show up, they didn't know how. If you didn't just show up, call and say, I didn't know how.
I think the other really interesting point about the at least statement is as a caregiver. So I don't know how many people are caregivers in the room or will be soon because they have older parents. I was doing hospice with children, and I was young. I was in my late 20s. That's young. Now it's young. Back then it wasn't. But I would go out into the world and someone would say, oh, well, you know, my grandfather is, you know, just died. And all I could think of was, at least you're not 8. And it was a really key moment for me to notice my resentment and anger around whether I was emotionally burnt out, whether I was leading with too much empathy and not enough compassion. There was something inside of that statement, that at least statement, that actually means we need a little bit of care. So I would just hold on to that. If your heart feels like you need to make an at least statement, that you go talk to someone that you love and embrace something really great for a little while.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Does anyone have a question? Yeah, just a brief question, and then I'm afraid we have to.
We want to keep talking, John.
I know.
Like one way I've been taught to support people is like when you show up and you don't know what to say, you can ask them like, what's the best way to support you? And if you don't know, then that's okay too. And then maybe like list some options that you think would be helpful. But then I was wondering if this was contradicting what you were saying earlier about like asking, putting it back on the person to ask them.
No, absolutely not. And I feel what you've done, and maybe I'm getting into too much of my coachy stuff, but what you've done is you've created a really beautiful container for somebody to fall into. And I think that in of itself is caring. And that's the difference between call me if you need me and how can I support you today? I don't know what to do. Let's figure this out together. Men, and I am stereotyping just a little bit, men tend to not want to talk too much about it. They want to walk with it a little bit more. And so if you are supporting a man in your life who's grieving, please try and do things with them to have a conversation. Don't just sit and talk. They like to do. They grieve through doing, which is kind of an interesting thing.
Absolutely.
I don't know.
Well, we all mourn differently, right? Like I want to talk, obviously, I like talking, and not everybody does, and so yeah, some people need to get it out, like action. To your point, also a very short, quick story as well. I went up to a friend, and again, I'm funny, right? You can see that, and I said to her, "Listen, you're divorced, you broke your back, your boys are going crazy, I need to feel better about myself, I need to just show up. I can't leave here without doing something for you, and I don't bake or make lasagnas, that's never happening. What can I do? Because I can't leave till I do something, I have to just show up." And she said, "A dog ripped open some garbage in my backyard, and I'm embarrassed, I don't want it, but I didn't want to ask anybody to clean it." And I went, "Oh my God, say no more." I got my rake and my daughter so that I could teach her, because I teach by example, and we cleaned up her backyard and she was thrilled. I just showed up and I asked. But I just said like, no, I can't leave without doing something. I need to just show up. So it's about me right now. Okay. Right? We're going to do this imperfectly.
Yes.
We're going to do this imperfectly.
I must say, this moderation is a really easy lark, isn't it? We didn't get, we only got to do my first question.
We only got through one question.
You see? It's you know, it's like.
But we answered question 2.
You did.
Yeah?
But we do have to end then, I'm afraid. Yeah. You're going to be around for a little bit, though. And
yes, and I would say I would hope this would be a beginning of a conversation ongoing for life. You can, and I know you can connect with Sarah or myself anytime. Thank you for just showing up today. That's what the bracelets are all about. So thank you.
Well, thank you both so much. Thank you. And we never talked about the pachyderm back there either, did we?
No, we didn't.
There we go. Okay, well, thank you both very much, and thank you to those of you asking the questions. I really appreciate that, because it's not always easy when you're talking about something as personal as grief. So really appreciate it.